Welcome, everyone, to this briefing brought to you by the Israel Defense and Security Forum, IDSF. In Hebrew, our name is Abitchonistim. IDSF is the leading Israeli organization advocating for strong national security-oriented policies to guide the state of Israel. We are a movement of more than 20,000 people, including many reserve officers and operators from all branches of the Israel Defense establishment. Thank you, of course, to all of our viewers and supporters for tuning into this briefing and our previous briefings. It's a great privilege to be able to bring to you this news out of Israel, this analysis of this war. I'm honored to be joined again by a fan favorite, Danny Seaman, the former director of the Israel Press Office. And Danny, it's great, of course, to have you here with us.
It's my pleasure. Thank you, as always.
So many of our viewers have noted that General Avivi has been absent for the past good number of briefings, and there's a very good reason for that, which is he is right now on a trip in the US. You know, when the war broke out, all hands on deck, everyone kind of hunkered down here in Israel. Much of our movement deployed and was fighting on the front lines, as many of them still are in active reserve duty. And at that point, we canceled all trips to the US. But as the months now progressed, we felt it was a proper time, and General Avivi was able to leave Israel for a short bit of time in order to make a trip to the US. When we, as a movement, as an NGO here in Israel, go to the US or to Canada or anywhere else in the world, the trips are really divided into three parts. There's, of course, the policy piece, meeting with officials, with military people, much of which is located in Washington, D.C., to discuss the most pressing issues for Israel's national security. There are the education pieces, wherein people like General Avivi speak in synagogues and churches, in schools, community centers, to really discuss what is happening in Israel and what our movement is doing to promote a vision of strength and unity. And then there was, of course, the fundraising piece, wherein people go to the States in order to raise money for this entire engine here in Israel. So that's why you haven't seen General Avivi recently. He's in great health, and he will be back with us shortly. But having said that, if any of our viewers are interested in arranging a tour to your community, to your area, please reach out. Whether we can bring General Avivi to your community, whether we can bring other leaders in our movement, other speakers. For example, Danny Seaman right here goes to the States and is quite capable, as you all know, to represent Israel and to represent Israel's security needs. So if anyone is interested, you should all have my email address. You should all know how to get in touch with us here at IDSF. Reach out, tell us you'd love to have a lecture, you'd love to have a visit to your community, and we will do our best to make those arrangements. Now, yesterday, it was great that we had Dan Diker join us in the briefing. And in my discussion with Dan, we spoke a little bit about Judea and Samaria in the arrangements of the Oslo Accords, Area A, Area B, and Area C, in order to kind of explain or describe what type of situation could be set up in Gaza. And in that context, a good number of people reached out and asked, what exactly is this Judea and Samaria that you're speaking about? And we take it as a given that there's a region in Israel, a very important region, the biblical heartland of Israel that we call Judea and Samaria, but in the media, you'll see it referred to as the West Bank. And sometimes our viewers are confused. Just call it the West Bank. That's what we know it as. Make things easier for us, the listeners, the viewers. But yet we keep insisting on calling it Judea and Samaria, and that is by design. And Danny, we're going to discuss that in a second. But I think in order to really hit home about how important labels are and how important it is to call it Judea and Samaria, you have to look no further than the executive order coming out of the Biden White House right now, where there are 4 settlers who are accused of settler violence and are the result of an executive order, which is amazing if you think about it, because there's probably more crime in one square block in Washington, D.C., than 4 settlers being the focus of this settler violence claim by the White House. And therefore, Judea and Samaria is not just a side note in this bigger discussion about what's happening in the war in Israel, but it's really important. So, Danny, I've said enough. Please explain to us, why do we call it that, and what do these labels really mean?
Um, we don't call it Judea and Samaria. Judea, Samaria are the geographical terms of the area and the biblical names of both areas. It's Yehuda v'Shomron in Hebrew, and it comes from the Bible. And this goes back generations. This goes back to the time of Jesus. This goes back to the time as far back as Abraham. So this was not the term. If you want to look at it as an abuse of a term, the term West Bank is a deliberately politically manipulative term, which calls it the West Bank, indicating that it is the West Bank of the Jordan, supposedly the Jordan River, but the West Bank of Jordan, Jordan being the East Bank of the Jordan River, and therefore implying that this is part of the Kingdom of Jordan, going back to the not only 67, but around the time of the creation and the partition plan, which they wanted, they deliberately abused these things and manipulated it to create an impression, which they latch on to today, that there is no really Israeli claim to this area. And I'll tell you something: if there's any claim of Jews to the land of Israel, it's in particularly Judea and Samaria. And I know that from my grandfather, I think I've mentioned this before, over 100 years ago, came to the land of Israel from Afghanistan, and they came here after World War I, when the rumors started spreading among the Jewish communities in the Levant, or in the what we call today the Middle East. They had heard that Jews were returning to the land of Israel. So my family, they came here to see that this was indeed happening, what was prophesied, and they saw the prophecies were coming true. And it took them about 4 or 5 years to go back to Afghanistan, come back here. By 1921, they returned, and my grandfather bought land, which to him was important, was purchasing of land, and he bought in the Hebron area, in the Gush Etzion area, in the Shiloh area, and other areas that to him were the land, the ancestral land of the Jewish people, which were Judea and Samaria. So when you use that term of Judea and Samaria, that's indicating very clearly who the land or whose the ancestral land belongs to. Anybody using the West Bank is implying politically that this is something separate from the state of Israel, and it's not. And I say it very clearly: if we do not have a right to Judea and Samaria, we have no right to this state at all, because then we are no more than these occupiers that these people claim us to be. By the way, if you use biblical areas, after the fall of the Second Temple and the fall of the kingdom of Judea and the taking over by the Romans, and this is all historical fact, when the Romans took over this area, for generations, Jews lived in a few areas. One was Jerusalem, another one was Hebron, that there had always been a Jewish presence in Hebron until 1929, when the Muslims there, and by the way, 1929, there was no Jewish occupation, there wasn't even a state of Israel. But there were Jews living there, and yet the Muslims found it necessary, just like we had in October 7th, to have a pogrom against the Jews there, because there was a threat. The Jews were threatening the Temple Mount. And that was the excuse they used nearly 100 years ago, before even the establishment of the state of Israel. So there's nothing new. But Hebron had a Jewish presence until that time, when talk about genocide, that's what they did to the Jewish presence in Hebron. But there was a Jewish presence in Hebron. There was one to a large degree in the area of Shechem, not the word Nablus. Nablus is the Arab mispronunciation of the word Neapolis. Neapolis is new city. The Romans, knowing that Shechem played such an important part to the Jewish presence here, that when they expelled the Jews from the land of Israel, they also changed the name, such as in Jerusalem, which they called Ilia Capitolina, and they changed the name of Shechem to Neapolis, which the Arabs, without the ability to pronounce P, call it Nablus. So there was Jewish presence there. There was Jewish presence in Yavne, and also in Gaza for many years. So these are all the history that people are unaware of. So Judea and Samaria, yes, it's become an issue now, and people are trying to use this also, in their attempt, And one of the things they're focusing on the day after, which there should be no talk right now about the day after, because who knows what's going to happen right now. And this goes to our daily update. I can give you a small update. Our battle in Khan Yunis continues. We're on the verge of taking full control of Khan Yunis. And people have to realize, because they'll say, all right, you said you're in control of northern Gaza, but there have been missiles fired from there, and there have been assaults on our soldiers who are there. Taking control of the area does not mean that we've gotten rid of the underground tunnels, because we're talking about anywhere between 500 kilometers to 750 kilometers of tunnels there. And we're in control of a large percentage of it, but there's still sort of back doors, if you want to call it that, they're gaining access to, and they pop up from time to time. So we're on the verge of taking complete control of Khan Yunis. We have destroyed, out of the 22 brigades that Hamas had in there, we've destroyed about 20 of them, and on the verge of destroying the last 2. What you have right now are these terrorists that are running around in civilian clothing, walking around as if they are civilians. And in the past few days, there are images coming out that show this precisely. Images photographed by the helmets of IDF soldiers, showing that suddenly somewhere somebody pops up, fires in their direction, or throws grenades in their direction. They take the person out, they kill that terrorist, and they see he's in civilian clothing. So this is what we're going to have to deal with in the next few weeks, until we finally are able to finish off Hamas there. So there's also activity going on in Judea and Samaria against the Palestinian Authority, area where they control. And they've allowed Hamas to grow there, but it's also elements of the Islamic Jihad and members of the PLO who are fighting there and arming themselves against Israel. So our forces are fighting in that area. One day it can be Jenin, another day it can be Kalkilia. There was events in Hebron. But there are elements trying to push Israel in advance, and they want to create a situation where at the day this thing is finally over, at least in Gaza, that they're going to let the Palestinian Authority, and already you hear people from Britain and the United States State Department, mostly it comes from the State Department, that talking about recognizing not only the PLO, but recognizing a Palestinian state. Israel has made this very clear. We're not talking about this. This will not happen at the moment. The PLO and the Palestinian Authority are in no position to take control over there, because they are not only aiding and abetting, they completely support the terrorist elements in Hamas. So Israel is not going to let this happen. So what you have right now is a political play going on between, left-wing elements also in Israel, and those who cannot accept the fact that their whole vision of a two-state solution, their whole vision of a Palestinian Authority, their whole vision of giving the terrorist organization PLO any recognition, has backfired in the way that anybody who back 30 years ago said this is a mistake, this is an absolutely ridiculous thing to do. You do not trust terrorists. And it took 30 years for people to finally realize that those who warned about this were absolutely right. So instead of recognizing and seeing what happened on October 7th, and understanding that a majority of Israelis will no longer accept this in any way or means possible, they're still trying to promote that. And they're staying stuck in October 6th and believing that if they just give or change the Palestinian Authority, something is going to change in that. Well, don't listen to the right wing in Israel. Don't listen to anybody who warned about it. Listen to the Palestinians themselves. The PLO, as much as Hamas, let's say Hamas will be out of the picture by the end of this battle. The PLO are no different, and they're saying it very clearly. What their goal is, in one way or another, to annihilate the state of Israel. We would be suicidal, and if in any way we allow them to take control in that area beyond what they have at the moment. So this is not going to happen, and yet those elements are still trying to do that 2 ways. One, by insisting on the political terminology, and the other is pointing fingers at the settlers as if they are some problem there. And if you have 4 people, which, by the way, no court in Israel found them guilty of anything, and this is just hearsay that is being promoted by the media as well, that these people were sort of involved in violence. And we're talking about 500,000 residents in Judea and Samaria. 4 people were involved. Let's say this is true. This is the danger when you have 75 to 90% of the Arabs in Judea and Samaria saying that they support what happened, what Hamas did on October 7th. And if they had the opportunity, they would join in to do something like that as well. Yet they're not worried about that, and they're telling us to trust them and let's move forward with recognizing an Arab state there. This is not going to happen. We cannot allow this, and we have to be aware of the manipulation, the political manipulation going on by certain elements, certainly in the State Department and the American left.
You know, our IDSF research department put out the number of 5,000 Palestinian attacks every year occur, as opposed to the alleged four, and yet no one is talking. No one is talking about that 5,000. But also, you know, since the beginning of the war, there have been close to 3,000 terror operatives apprehended by the IDF in Judea and Samaria alone. Danny, how volatile do you think the whole region is? Meaning the fact, you know, when the war first broke out, speaking with family and friends in those areas, they were kind of bracing for potentially what could happen. And thank God nothing has really happened. Do you think it's a matter of time? You know, as much as we worry about Gaza and now we're focused on Lebanon and Iran, do you think it's a matter of time before things erupt in that area?
Well, things have already erupted, and that's the whole thing. You know, what indicates a war there? One terrorist, two terrorists? Let me ask any of the viewers here: if a terrorist showed up in your neighborhood and murdered people there, or tried to murder somebody, and you know that the state next door or the country next door were the ones promoting this, supporting this, or they were trying to, and by the way, this did happen, the attempt to fire missiles from Judea and Samaria towards places in Israel, that has failed because Israel has a bigger presence there and has been able to thwart their attempt. But weapons are flooding in to the Palestinian Authority in Judea and Samaria through the border with Jordan. By the way, a lot of the weapons that were used by that were left by the United States in Afghanistan have found their way into the hands of terrorists here. But going back to my question, any of the viewers here, if a nation next door to you was involved in one terrorist attack, would that be acceptable? And here we're going through almost daily attacks, not only against our citizens in Judea and Samaria, but also here in Jerusalem and in Tel Aviv, and there were incidents all throughout the country. But let's go back, say that the breaking point is October 7th. This is an all war of proxies being operated by Iran. And this, Amir has said this often in the briefings that we've given here. Iran is behind everything. They're behind Hamas, of course. They're behind Hezbollah in Lebanon. They're behind Iranian and Iraqi terrorist elements that have gone in through Syria. They're involved with the Houthis. So Iran is behind this, and they're using this to create an ongoing war. And which means that Israel, and our Minister of Defense just said the other day, that if they do not reach an agreement with Hezbollah in the next few days, and the only thing, there are two things holding back Hezbollah at the moment. One is, of course, that the Iranians are more concerned about them because they are also Shia, just as the Iranians are. But it's also for the Hezbollah themselves. They have Lebanon. They're supposedly now the element in control and running Lebanon. And they understand that this will not just be, we've had 220 some Hezbollah members killed and in the combat going on in the past 4 months. And you had several positions and very strategic positions of Hezbollah hit. But Lebanon is a country that is in financial disarray at the moment. They could suffer as much as Gaza is. And I tell you, go look at the pictures. Look at the images coming out of the Gaza Strip. And ironically, they kept telling us that Gaza Strip is a open air prison. But now they're showing the pictures of before and after. And if you look at the picture behind me of Tel Aviv, it competed. Gaza competed with these images you see behind us. And there's not much of that left because everything was run by the terrorists. Everything was a front for the presence of terrorism. And the Hezbollah have done the same thing in Lebanon. And Lebanon will pay the consequences in the same way because we're not playing games anymore. Prime Minister has made this very clear. So in this sense, yes, it could erupt. But in the advantage we have in Judea and Samaria right now is both the presence of Jewish communities there and the presence of our military there, something we did not have in Gaza, nor do we have in Lebanon for quite some time.
Thank you, Danny. Many of our viewers are asking, how do you watch a recording of this important briefing we're doing right now? And I'll answer that. Very simple. every day, IDSF, we send out an email of the recording of the briefing. So if you are on our mailing list, you get a recording of this briefing and all of our previous briefings. If you're not on a mailing list, make sure you sign up to the mailing list. The link is in the chat, but most of you should be on the mailing list if somehow you've wound up in our briefings. Okay, we have a few minutes left and a really important topic. Tomorrow we're going to discuss this in more detail, so everyone should come back in terms of U.S.-Israel relations. But Danny, you are an insider into the worldview of Prime Minister Netanyahu. You know him personally. You've worked with him. You were very much working with his office for many years. So in his discussions that are unfolding probably as we speak with Secretary Blinken, what do you think the red lines are for Netanyahu in terms of a hostage deal?
He's made it very clear what the red lines are. He said it. I've never seen the prime minister be so obvious about things. Now, credit to Netanyahu over the years. And one of the things he's not been given a privilege to do as others, because he's immediately attacked for anything he does and accused of being a liar, etc. Look, politics is a game. And you can't always say exactly what you're saying. If I go back to Prime Minister Shamir, for example, and the Gulf War at the time, and Shamir was asked several, he said, we don't have to say everything. And they said that we had lied about something that we had done during the war. He says, that's the whole thing. You don't tell the truth. You don't give information to your enemies. So Netanyahu, for example, if they said over the years that, oh, he had his Bar Ilan speech, that he was talking about the possibility of an Arab state in Judea and Samaria. So he said that what needed to have been said at the time. The question was, what did he do over 20 years? And over 20 years, he made it almost impossible because he knew how detrimental an Arab state run by PLO could be to the state of Israel and the existence of the state of Israel. It's quite clear today to everybody. So he operated in what was the interest of the state of Israel. And sometimes you have these interests. Now, look, we're partners with the United States. We have good relations with the United States. This administration has been outstanding with its support of Israel, but nothing is done out of the goodness of their heart. Things are done by interest. Now, what Netanyahu has always tried to do is make Israel a fundamental interest that serves interests of the United States, of Russia, of China in different ways. They're not conflicting, by the way. Our position here in the Middle East, which is a very important position, we needed to make these countries understand that it's beneficial to them to have good relations with Israel. And this has always been the goal of Netanyahu, and that goes also for the Arab countries here. So he operated in that direction for many years, and that's what he's continuing to do. Now, at the same time, the United States has its own interests. These may not comply with the United States. Now, the State Department, for the example, has always had the interest of believing that since the Arabs are 1 billion strong and the Muslims are 1 billion strong, it's much better to serve them or work with them because that'll benefit the United States. Correct, incorrect, that's their decision to make. What we have to do in Israel is do what in our best interest. And our best interest, by the way, outdo those of the United States because our interest is survival. Whether or not the United States succeeds with us or with the Arabs or the Muslims, it's not going to endanger the very existence of the United States. The Americans have a greater existential issue right now going on along their border, more than what's happening here. And in this case, support of Israel and gaining the experience. And what a lot of people don't understand, that Israel supports the United States in ways beyond just our mere presence here in the Middle East. It's R&D, for example. Everything, the battle we're waged in at the moment, everything is shared. All the knowledge is shared with the Americans. The American Ministry of Defense or Secretary of Defense and the ministry there all understand the benefits the United States get from their cooperation, military cooperation with Israel. So you always have to remember that. And countries don't always have to say it. I know that, give an example, a personal example, during the terrorist attacks here back in the early 2000s, I was on location in almost every one of these events afterwards, talking to the media. And the spokesman for Prime Minister Sharon at the time, we were being pressured by President Bush to make different concessions to the PLO. And we had a terrible attack against a bus that came from the old city and blew up in Mea Shearim. And you had at least 12 children that were murdered in this bus incident. And I was speaking then to Ra'anan Gisin, who was the spokesman for Sharon. And he said, look, I want you to get this message across. The prime minister doesn't know about it. You will be reprimanded for saying this, but it needs to be said. And I said this on being an official representative of Israel. I said this in an interview. It really brushed the American administration at that time the wrong way. They were very, very taken aback by it. Basically, I said that the pressure, Bush's pressure of the state of Israel is costing the lives of our children, which was in fact true. And they were not pleased with this. We allowed the prime minister plausible deniability, the ability to say that he didn't come, and he didn't. And I was reprimanded for it, but I was willing to pay that price because it needed to have been said at that time. So a lot of the things you see today, there was this report of Biden may have said something about Prime Minister Netanyahu. He may have not. You always know that, especially when it comes out to the media, that the people around the president, the people within, certainly people around the prime minister here, we sometimes use these journalists to get messages across that may not be, and I personally don't believe that Biden agrees with that, but it was certainly elements within his administration are very happy with the message that Biden is criticizing Netanyahu for that to get out. And so always take it with a grain of salt. I think I said this in our first briefing that I gave here, that Tom Friedman, which is upheld by many Israelis as being this really important journalist, many Americans know and totally disregard him. We knew that he is basically a joke. We never treated him seriously, but we knew we could easily manipulate him to get things that we wanted to get out there. So they'll do this. And journalists are an easy source at times. If you know what buttons to push, you can use them. And I said this in a briefing a day or so last week or the week before, when we were talking about the negotiations going on. Listen, there's a lot of manipulation, media manipulation going on with the media here. They're easily manipulated. Let's wait till the last day when the agreement is signed, then you'll know what is going on. What is going on behind the scenes? The Americans, the Egyptians, the Qataris, the Hamas, Israel, everybody has interests, and they're all using the media to get there, to try to promote their interests. So the people have to be aware of that.
Thank you, Danny. We have 1 minute left, so it's going to be a 1 minute question and answer. In terms of the red lines of Netanyahu, he has said he won't release prisoners, he won't end the war. So what room is there? What do you think he will give into if there were to be a hostage deal?
Listen, this is not, people comparing this to previous negotiations, this is not the similar situation, because in the past, there wasn't pressure by the IDF. Say, for example, that soldier that we'd released for 1,200 terrorists at the time. This is not the same situation. Every day we get closer to the leaders of Hamas. Every day we get closer to taking them out. And they, by the way, Sinwar may not be aware of this because he's dug underground. And one of the problems is they can't reach him. And there's a debate going on between Hania, who's being covered in Qatar, and Sinwar himself. But Netanyahu has made it very clear. One thing I agree, the war will not end. It cannot end. Any end to the war before the annihilation of Hamas is not only a defeat for Israel, it's an existential issue. Israel, it'll take 5, 10, 15 years. Israel will end up being destroyed if we do not destroy Hamas and send a clear message to anybody planning our demise in the future. And this is what this war is about. Regarding the numbers, he's saying something that many Israelis agree with, because it's not the number right now. It's the fact that these terrorists go back. And why should we be giving them more soldiers or more murderers to then? And people are saying, you know who the hostages are. You don't have faces for who the victims of these terrorists are going to be in the future. So the prime minister is very reluctant. But under certain conditions, that element may change. Because, look, it is a give and take. But he's been saying very clearly, we will not let the serious terrorists loose, because these people will become the next leaders, and we cannot afford and allow that to happen.
Danny Seaman, thank you so much for joining me and sharing your wealth of knowledge and experience with all of our viewers. Thank you, of course, to all of our viewers and supporters for tuning into this briefing. We will be back with you tomorrow, 10 a.m. Eastern time. We're going to discuss Israel-U.S. relations with Ambassador Yoav Mettinger, so please stay tuned for that. Until then, stay safe, stay strong, everyone. Take care.